So the vampire game that I'm running takes place in various decades. Started in the 1920s, and now we're about to start the 1950s. And I've tried to make the different decades have kind of a connective tissue, if you will, like a thematic feeling that is similar to the decade that they take place in. So like the 20s involved a lot of stuff with prohibition, gangsters, crime, because I don't know if you know this, but if you take a product that's really popular and you make it illegal, that doesn't actually stop people from using it, but it generates a massive criminal enterprise to supply it. And then the 30s had to do with the Great Depression, economic collapse, drifters, the Dust Bowl migrants coming into California. So for the 40s, I wanted to do something involving the Nazis, because everybody loves to kill Nazis, right? And I also figured, like, everybody loves Indiana Jones, so let's do an Indiana Jones adventure for the 40s. Let's do like a globe-trotting treasure hunt, similar to something Indiana Jones would do. And that's the storyline that I set up. And so this is the story of that adventure, that globe-spanning journey that they went on during the 1940s in the midst of the Second World War to recover this artifact called the Eye of Hazamiel. Now, the Eye of Hazamiel is just a MacGuffin. It's a thing that I found on the White Wolf wiki when I was just looking up like artifacts, and it just popped up, and it was like it sounds like it's basically the vampire version of the Eye of Vecna. Like you stick it in your head, you tear out your eye, you put that eye in there, and it's like superpowers. And whether it works, what exactly it does, doesn't fucking matter, because I don't intend for the players to ever get hold of it, really. And if they do get hold of it, it'll just be like, you don't know what it does. And if they're stupid enough to like tear out their eye and stick it in there, I'll just be like, it just kills you. So this adventure, the 1940s chapter, begins when Beckett comes to town. And if you don't know who Beckett is, he is an official character in the Vampire the Masquerade universe. He's in a lot of the books. He has his own book, actually. And he's in the video game as well.
I see my reputation for once does not precede me. My name is Beckett.
And Beckett is basically like vampire Indiana Jones. He goes on adventures, travels around the world, and tracks down ancient artifacts and lost pieces of lore. Beckett is here looking for this object, or specifically he's looking for a map to the object. And the reason he's come here is because he thinks that the players have the map. Now, in the backstory that the players came up with, their sort of ancestor, this Malkavian Antonio, he was also sort of a vampire historian, right? Beckett shows up looking for this fragment of a map, because there are always map fragments. That's just how things roll. If you got something important, you hide it somewhere, preferably in a tomb. You make a map, you fragment the map, you set guardians. Players have one of these map fragments that they recovered during the 1930s when they were in New York, and just out of nowhere, Cassandra decided, I'm just gonna go visit the site of our old home in New Jersey. So she just walked off there. I had no idea that she was gonna go there, but I knew already that I had intended to send them there like 10 years later to go find this map fragment, so I just had her find it then. So the reason Beckett is looking for this Eye of Hazamiel is because another guy, Dr. Netchurch, is looking for it. And Dr. Netchurch is also a character that's in the official vampire lore. Netchurch is a Malkavian. He is a scientist, and he is sort of obsessed with the idea that vampires are scientifically explainable, that like vampirism is a scientifically rational disease that you can sort of study and deduce, which isn't the case, because in the world of darkness there is just supernatural stuff that can't really be scientifically quantified. But Netchurch is a Malkavian, so he doesn't really grasp that. Now, the players had run into Netchurch in the 1930s during the whole American Bund fiasco, which I mentioned in an earlier video. And Netchurch actually survived that encounter. All the other vampires they ran into got killed, but Netchurch was allowed to go, mainly because Dr. Carter wanted to take on some of his research, and they kind of made a deal where the prince let Netchurch go if he turned over all of his data to Dr. Carter. Netchurch was trying to help these Nazi vampires create like super Aryan ghoul soldiers. And he has still continued to do that in the intervening 10 years, and he has created them kind of, although they're not really anything special, they're basically just regular ghouls. But now Netchurch has become involved in the SS and the occult side of the SS. And they have tasked him with hunting down this artifact, the Eye of Hazamil, so that, much like the plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, they can get this object and it will make the armies of Nazi Germany invincible. This is actually all based a little bit on reality. There actually were a number of Nazis. There were a number of members in the SS, mainly Willigit Weisthor and Himmler and guys like that, who were very interested in this occultist stuff. And some of the iconography and early ideology of the Nazi Party is based on a lot of this sort of witchcraft and occult lore and things that these guys brought in. It was never that significant a portion of the Nazi ideology, because most of the Nazi guys had no knowledge or interest in any of this stuff. And because, try though they might, in their creepy secret castle of Wewelsburg, where the SS would bring the rings of their fallen comrades together in a pyre or whatever, there is no such thing as magic, so it doesn't matter how many SS soldiers stand in a circle chanting, trying to summon Aryan super demons. It ain't ever gonna happen, right? And there's a documentary, a fascinating documentary called The Secret Glory, about Otto Rahn, who was this German archaeologist who was recruited into the SS and was involved in various investigations that they had trying to track down occult artifacts. So the quest is, we have to get the map fragments before Netchurch gets them, so that we can beat him to the secret tomb to get the MacGuffin. Simple, straightforward, pulp adventure. Divya is like, yeah, definitely, we can help you with this. Beckett's a very respected guy in the vampire community. He's a great scholar. Sure, we'll send a bunch of our people with you to help you recover this artifact. So she sends all the player characters, because obviously all the player characters wanted to go. Nobody wants to be the one who is like, I stayed home and missed out on the Indiana Jones adventure. Nobody wants that. Going along with them on this journey are Beckett, obviously. Also Nick, who is the heroic vampire cop. He is asked to go along to help them. Also with them is Peliquin, one of the Nosferatu deputies. Deacon, this new gangrel in town who is being punished because he broke Masquerade by turning into a wolf and pissing on a guy's flowers in view of a human. Simon the Devious, who is a new Tremere in the city. Kikili, who is Simon's gargoyle bodyguard. And then finally, Nandor. Nandor is also a new character. He is this very, very old Ventru, very powerful, formerly an Archon of Hardestat, who's the king shit Ventru. And Nandor is this ancient renowned warrior, but he is, at this point in time, a wreck. He's just an emotional disaster. He's severely depressed. He has no backbone or sense of motivation. He just kind of droops around and mopes and whines and can't stay focused. He's just a mess. And he's such a mess that he's become a horrible embarrassment to the rest of the Ventru. And Enzo, who is the player character Ventru, he is told by Lacroix that Nandor is to be ostensibly in charge of the mission because he's this elder and he's very respected. But Nandor is really an embarrassment. And since it would be politically complicated to get rid of Nandor, it would be better if he were just to disappear. They say, look, if Nandor, if he goes out there and he comes back alive and he turns back into the old Nandor and is, pillaging and fucking up the Sabbat, great. We love that. And if he doesn't, and the Sabbat just kill him, you know what? That's probably for the best. Better he be eaten up by the Sabbat than he continue to sit around on his ass and embarrass us. Basically, either Nandor has to, get out of his funk and become an ass kicker again, or the other Ventru just don't want him coming back alive. So this led to a whole subplot of the campaign, which we came to refer to as how Nandor got his groove back. Nandor, by the way, and Deacon and Simon the Devious, and also two other characters that are about to show up in the story, Laszlo and Nadja. These are all characters from What We Do in the Shadows, the movie, and then also the television series based on the movie. Both very funny, and I stole all these characters from there, so that's where they come from. Then the players have their itinerary. They have one map fragment, they need 3 others, and they, based on what Becca tells them, they think they know where they can find these 3 map fragments. One, they think, belongs to a gangrel named Laszlo Cravensworth, who supposedly murdered in a duel another vampire who was thought to have had this fragment. So that's their best lead on that one. And he is currently in Cuba. The second fragment ended up in the art collection of an Indian Khan, and eventually it was lost by his son in a poker game at his art school in upstate New York to one of his classmates, Orson Welles, the actor and film director. And currently, Orson Welles, who at this point in time has just finished his masterpiece Citizen Kane, he is in Rio de Janeiro filming a documentary for the State Department. And the third piece, the best information anyone has on it, is that it was in the hands of this vampire who traveled into Transylvania and was killed by a relatively famous vampire known as the Dracula. So the players get all their supplies together, they get guns, they get grenades, they get all their NPCs, they put their affairs in order, they all get on a ship, and they sail for Cuba. So the first stop is Cuba, where they meet the Cravensworths. And the Cravensworths are this old, vampire married couple. Nadja is this elder gangrel. Her husband is also her chilled, this British nobleman who she embraced and then married. And the two of them have been kicked out of a lot of places. They are sort of vampire pariah because of various indiscretions, most of which involved arson. They have been blood hunted out of numerous territories, including almost all of mainland Europe. And now they are residing in Cuba. But when they hear the story of this whole thing, they are eager to help, or at least Laszlo is, because he's a good British citizen, and even if he's been blood hunted out of Mithras's domain and can never set foot on jolly old England again, he'll be damned if he's going to let any Germans get their sauerkrauty fingers on the Queen's good china. They agree to assist, and after several hours of ransacking their house, they remember that they don't have the map fragment anymore. They traded it to a Samdi named Papa Shango in exchange for his pet dog named Potato, who then ran away. So everyone heads off to find Papa Shango, and they do. They negotiate with Papa Shango, who has the map fragment, and they almost get into a fight over this, but eventually Papa Shango convinces Laszlo to trade him his witch hat, which is a cursed hat made out of the skin of a witch, in exchange for the map fragment. Potato shows up, and Laszlo realizes that he's been duped, and the Potato abandoned him to go back to his master as soon as the trade was completed years ago. So Laszlo gets pissed, and Papa Shango tries to attack him, tries to liquefy him, which is something that Samdi can do. But he crit fails, because he's wearing the witch hat, which causes you to crit fail at everything. And so he accidentally reduces himself to sludge. The Cravensworths are already not real well liked, and they think this is maybe going to get them in trouble with the Baron. And so they're like, well, only one thing to do, get the fuck out of Cuba.
We can't ever go back to Arizona!
So they load themselves up onto the ship and sail off with the players. The next stop is Rio de Janeiro. They arrive here looking for Orson Welles, and they find out that he's missing, and this eventually leads them to 2 other guys who are also looking for Orson Welles. And these are 2 British soldiers, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Now, you might know Peter Cushing for his role in Star Wars.
Charming to the last.
And you might know Christopher Lee for his role in Lord of the Rings.
A new power is rising.
And for playing Dracula in 400 movies. And for his role in Star Wars.
It's a great pity that our paths have never crossed before, Obi-Wan.
But before they were actors, these guys were in the army during the Second World War. Christopher Lee, especially, he was in some like secret British Nazi hunting spy battalion, like some sort of James Bond shit. So I just decided to throw them into the story for fun. The players meet up with them. They have some interesting conversations with Peter Cushing. A really fascinating little moment where Nathan starts talking to Peter Cushing and just asking him questions while using mind control powers on him to force him to respond. So Nathan is like asking me questions like, what was your childhood like? And I'm reading Wikipedia and I'm like, oh, when I was a boy, my mother had wanted me to be a daughter, so she used to dress me in girls' clothing. And Nathan is like, that's fascinating. And I'm like, that is fascinating. I had no idea. Anyway, they convince the Brits that they are all part of the French Foreign Legion. And they go with them on this adventure to rescue Orson Welles, who's been kidnapped by some Nazis. As it turns out, Orson Welles has been kidnapped by Netchurch, but Netchurch has already left. They just missed Netchurch, of course. They break in, and they kill a bunch of Nazis, and they find Orson Welles in here. He's being held prisoner with a bunch of these Aryan super ghouls, who he has organized into a production of Julius Caesar. And he's trying to direct them. They talk with Orson Welles, and Orson Welles tells them that he did have that map fragment, but that Netchurch took it from him and also took another object of his, a magical bag full of bones. And so they ask him about this magical bag full of bones, and Orson Welles tells them, I can tell you about that, only if you agree to perform a small magic trick with me in which I use this magical timer. This sand timer is made with sand that was underneath an ancient 99-year-old Chinaman who inhaled his final breath as he achieved nirvana, and his spirit fused with the sand so that as it pours through the hourglass, no one who is speaking can speak a lie. So Orson Welles tells them the entire story of his journey to Africa to scout locations on the Congo River for his film adaptation of Heart of Darkness. He gets there and he finds this strange metaphysical place where like truth and falsehood and like past and present, reality and magic are all one and the same, and this shaman takes him there and shows him this weird mound. Now what he's describing is a cairn, which is a holy place where energy coalesces in the world of darkness, and which the shapeshifters, the werewolves, go and like draw energy off of. But the players don't know this, and Orson Welles of course doesn't know this. He just knows that he was taken to some strange holy place and that he saw creatures in the mist that looked sort of like half human, half beast things, like something out of the island of Dr. Moreau. He gets this bag full of knuckle bones that he found at this cairn, and he's told that this will bring him good luck for the rest of his life. And so he carries it with him until he meets Netchurch, and he trades it to Netchurch in order not to be killed. So Netchurch takes the map, and he takes the good luck charm. What this good luck charm does is, as long as you're holding it, it makes it so that your crit rating is reduced, so that like you're more likely, like twice as likely to critically succeed. But then if you ever lose it, even for like a few minutes, if it ever leaves your possession, for the rest of your life, you're cursed for your critical fail rating to be doubled instead of your critical success rating. And I loved this whole story. I loved like timing out this whole speech so that he gives this whole spiel about how this timer is going to run for 5 minutes, and as long as it's running, I can only tell the truth. And then he ends the speech by telling them, while it is true that I only told the truth for those 5 minutes, we've been talking for 6.5 minutes. It was very Orson Welles.
I did promise that for 1 hour, I'd tell you only the truth. That hour, ladies and gentlemen, is over. For the past 17 minutes, I've been lying my head off.
And I just loved the idea that Orson Welles had gotten this magic charm that would make him successful at everything he did, and then immediately went on to make Citizen Kane, which is considered by many people to be the greatest film ever made. I mean, it's not, but it is a great film. And then lost the bag. And if you know the history of Orson Welles, you know that after Citizen Kane, the next 40 years of his life, the whole rest of his career, was basically a massive series of failures. It was just this never-ending struggle to make movies. This guy, who's one of the greatest actors, greatest filmmakers of all time, could just never get together the money and the creative control to just make the movies he wanted to make, all because he lost this lucky charm. So the players free Orson Welles, They take the copy of the map that he's able to draw for them, sort of an incomplete copy, and they leave Rio de Janeiro, and they head off towards Europe. The next place they stop is Casablanca. They stop off here to meet with Jeanette, who is an old friend of theirs from LA who got kicked out of the city after the whole catastrophe with the Bund. Jeanette has a new bar here. They spend a couple of days hanging out with her, meeting various friends, and they meet a number of other vampires here. They meet a Banu Hakim named Fadlan, and they also meet a Nancy, which is a African gangrel, like a spider gangrel, named Mokai. And the two of them are hunting this werewolf, specifically an abomination. An abomination is a werewolf that is embraced as a vampire. Now, normally this is something that never happens, and no one ever attempts it, because if a vampire comes anywhere near a werewolf, they just shut him apart. But every once in a while, someone tries to pull this off. And like 99 times out of 100, when you do this, the vampire blood just burns through the werewolf. It has an allergic reaction. It just fucking dies horribly. But if you keep doing it often enough, eventually, sometimes it works, and you actually get a werewolf who is also a vampire, which is considered a horrible abomination and hated by everyone. And one of these apparently exists, and these two vampires are chasing it. And they have come here to see this seer, Kahina. Now, Kahina is important for two reasons. Number one, because she tells them that this abomination is going to the same place that the players are going, so that these two vampires join their group and go with them. The other reason that she's important is because of a very strange thing that she says when Cassandra asks her to read her future. And Cassandra says to her, "Can you tell me anything that will help to keep me alive in the days to come?" And Kahina, she rolls out her bones, and she looks at her thing and kind of uses her power to look into the cobweb. She's a Malkavian. And she says, "Don't get on the boat." They also meet Jeremy McNeil. Jeremy McNeil is a famous vampire responsible for overthrowing lots of Camarilla stuff. He is currently helping to liberate Africa. Since they're doing something important, he's like, "Oh, okay, this sounds like it's important as well. I don't like the Nazis. I don't like Net Church. I'll come with you." And the other person they meet is Jack.
What a scene, man! Woo-wee!
He is another vampire from the lore, and he's from the video game, where he's voiced by the same guy who does the voice for Bender. And since they're going to do some important stuff, Jack also agrees to go along with them and help them, mainly because they pay him. They have to go through blockades and through whatever it is, one of the straits, to get past Turkey to go up towards Transylvania, which is currently an area that's occupied by the Nazis. Jack is a smuggler, and he has a boat and knows how to get up there, so they pay him to come along. And now they head off to Transylvania. They eventually get there, they land, they travel across the forest for a while, and they get to this little village. They find this guy, Straker, who is operating a tourist attraction where he takes people on tours of Castle Dracula. And he has little flyers, he has a wagon. There's this other couple there, this German couple, a Nazi officer and his wife, who are there on vacation, who are going to go on this tour. And so the players kind of look around, and they're not sure what the deal is with this guy, and they're like, this is all kind of weird, but okay, let's go on this tour and see if this is anything to do with the real Dracula. And Straker takes them around and shows them locations from the book and stuff. And then he takes them to Castle Dracula. Here it is, the castle of the vampire. And it's just this dilapidated, ruined castle out in the mountains. And he takes them out there and he's like, "Look, here we go," and goes into the castle and is walking around. And then they meet Dracula, who is an actor dressed as Dracula. And he comes out and is like, "Oh, welcome to my castle. Come and see my wine cellar," and stuff. And it's just it's very cheesy and very weird. And they're just kind of like, what the heck? So this guy kind of walks off. He takes the German couple with him. And Straker goes off with them. And there's this weird servant guy who's like, "Shh, wait." Then the servant goes "Everybody close your eyes. And when you open them again, you will see with the eyes of the Dracula." So the players are all like, "Okay, we close our eyes." And then we open them again. And they now find that they are in this magnificent, enormous palace, surrounded by finery of all kinds. The place is bitchin'. And where once there was this creepy looking little like caretaker guy, now there is the Dracula. In Vampire the Masquerade, Dracula is a Tzimisce. Specifically, he is of the old Tzimisce. The Tzimisce are like the real fuck off vampires. Like they're flesh warpers, they're creepy, they're evil, they're all demented. Like they have like a demon inside them. They're all kinds of nuts and scary. You don't want anything to do with them. Most Tzimisce, the vast majority of them, are in the Sabbat. But there are some who aren't in the Sabbat. There are some of what are called the old Tzimisce who predate the Sabbat for the most part. They're mostly the really ancient ones. And so there's a real dichotomy within that clan between kind of like the young guns who are all like, let's fucking turn ourselves into monster tentacle creatures and ascend to godhood. And then the old fuckers who like sit in their castles and like, dude, I've been sitting in this castle eating these peasants out of this village for 4,000 years. I ain't moving any place. And Dracula is of that old Tzimisce. He's like the ancient aristocracy of Romania. All he wants to do is just sit in the Carpathian Mountains, rule over his little fief of people, and be left the fuck alone. So they meet Dracula. They go through these elaborate rituals they have to do. Before they left, Lacroix had to explain, like in great detail, all the different steps you have to go through of like exchanging gifts, the phrases of you have to go through, like how to go over a threshold, how to be invited, how many days you can stay, when meal times are, all this stuff of like, how to ask for a Wi-Fi password. There's a whole litany of like ritualized interactions you have to go through with the Tzimisce in order to be considered to have hospitality in their home. If you do all this stuff, all the exchanging of gifts and the proper little ceremonies, then the Tzimisce will welcome you in and, all right, you're cool, you're here, you're an honored guest, of course. And the Tzimisce will protect you because it's tradition. But if you fuck it up, they'll just eat you. They're like, well, you're just rude, and they just take your head off. And so they go through all this, and then Dracula invites them into his house, he shows them around, shows them all his awesome shit. They spend a lot of time complimenting all of his shit because he had to give him lots of compliments. So they have dinner with Dracula and his wives and his ghouls. And then Dracula tells them that he's going to have these various entertainments for the next couple of days. They're there for 3 days. For the next few days, they have a series of these different like contests and basically like mini games that I created for the players to play in. One of these is a game where they stab people and they have to like bet on who gets stabbed with what implement. And I believe it was Nathan who won that, and he wins this beautiful gown. What was the story that I came up with this for this gown? That he traveled to Paris to get this gown from like a toreador in the court of love who had it, and he had to like diablerize the toreador to get the dress, and then he brought it back to Transylvania to give it to this princess he was courting, but it had taken him so long that while he was away she married a different prince, so then he had to burn their kingdom to the ground and murder all their people and kill them both. But he still has the dress. So Nathan wins this dress. He's pretty psyched about that. They have another contest where they are chasing a stag. See who can catch this stag. And Nathan also wins that contest. He catches the stag. And he gets this sword that belongs to... What is her name? Lucretia de Aragon or something? There's like a character that Beckett knows. It's the sword that she dropped in some battle that when Dracula was fighting her, and he like took her sword after she dropped it when the Sabbat were fleeing the battlefield. Because in Dracula's backstory, it's like the Sabbat fell upon me and I just murdered all of them. Then he ran away screaming. Because he's Dracula, he just does whatever the fuck he wants. And then they had a contest where they had a race where they have ghouls who they put little like daddy saddles on, little daddles, and they ride them and like hit them with sticks to like race their people mounts around in circles. Anna won that, and so she gets this baton that is like this silver war mace that's designed to like deal damage to werewolves. It's like an anti-werewolf weapon. And then comes the last contest, the werewolf game. And the werewolf game is that the elder vampires pretend to be werewolves, and all the other vampires get to be vampires, and they have to attack the werewolves. So basically, it's a game where the young vampires had to attack the elder vampires, and they just get their shit stomped in. And this is where things got a little strange. The way that this was supposed to go was just, it's like Dracula and his wives and Nandor are the elders, and they're just crushing people and just loving it. And this was the high point for Nandor. Like, Nandor had been depressed through a lot of this journey. He'd had like this emotional breakdown when they had like attacked this Nazi airfield in Algiers, and they had like been slaughtering people everywhere. And Nathan tried to like use his Malkavian abilities to like awaken Nandor's passion, and basically he just went into like a blind rage, slaughtered a bunch of people, tore off all his clothes, and ran around in the rain screaming. And they just sat there and cried for a long time. And they've been like talking to him a lot. Nathan especially, it was interesting to me that Nathan put so much effort into this. But Nathan especially was putting a lot of effort into helping Nandor to get his groove back, talking him through his problems and his depression and why he was all sad. And then they got to Dracula's castle, and Nandor and Dracula like really bonded. They were having a good time together, and it was like the good old days before we had Camarilla and the Sabbat. We were all just vampires. We were all just having fun together, tormenting everybody. And so Nandor really has opened up, and he's having a lot more fun. He's become a lot more animated, and his mental health has dramatically improved during this trip, especially since hanging out with Dracula. And they have gotten right up to the point where I was just about that night to have the scene where there was going to be this big reveal about Nandor, which was that Dracula was going to tell Enzo the story about Nandor, which they had been had been like leading up to this for a while. I had told several stories that had kind of almost gone up to this story and then not finished it, and like there had been weird things about Nandor, things that he had said about like not thinking he was who he was anymore, and that he wasn't the person he used to be, and he didn't know where do I belong in the world, and like I think it was Nathan had gotten like a Malkavian vision where he had a dream where someone told him like Nandor isn't Nandor anymore. And the story that Dracula was going to tell them was the story of Dracula's encounter with the Cathedral of Flesh. Now, the Cathedral of Flesh is exactly what it sounds like. It's a giant tower made out of dead things that this ancient Tzimisce just crafted into a fucking building of corpses. And at some point in his backstory, Dracula marched in there like, I'm fucking Dracula, I'm gonna kill this guy, and it didn't go well for him. He got owned. But then the Cathedral of Flesh started collapsing, supposedly because Dracula's destiny was to survive and kill this demon. So the cathedral like sensed it or something and turned on its master. And in the confusion, he was able to kill this other Tzimisce and escape. This is in the official lore. What I added to it was Nandor. And the story that I had, which I was going to reveal to the players, was that when Dracula fled out of the Cathedral of Flesh, and he had told them this part of the story already. He had told them this at dinner the previous night. He had seen all these piles of muscle and bone and skin and fat that had been the Cathedral of Flesh like break off and start to reform and crawl away. Some of them crawling into the forest as strange monstrosities that you would never have seen or imagined. Others forming into things that were similar to or even identical to creatures you would see in nature, like, and just like frolicking away, finding their own form again. And that it was this bizarre, hideous, beautiful transformation of like 74 million tons of flesh just crashing to the ground and spontaneously growing into hundreds of life forms and just flying into nowhere. And among those life forms was Nandor, who just walked out naked and confused and just ran into the woods, never to be seen again. Because Nandor's backstory, which the players have been told, was that Nandor used to be this fuck-off Archon who was out in like the Carpathians killing Sabbat hundreds of years ago. And then he rode off on this war party. He was missing for a long time, and then eventually he came back. All the other Camarilla who'd been with him had all been killed. They were all killed by Sabbat. And no one's exactly sure what happened, but he was just never the same after that. And what had happened was, they had all been captured by the Sabbat, and they had all been turned into parts of the Cathedral of Flesh. And so Nandor basically had himself rended apart at like a molecular level and is fused with this building of skin and bones. And then when it collapsed, for whatever reason, Nandor, or things that thought they were Nandor, reformed into him. Or at least something that looked like him. And he has been trapped in this like existential nightmare ever since of not understanding what it is that's happened to him or what it is that he is, and being terrified to even like contemplate or confront or discuss the fact that he might not even really be anything even close to the entity that he once was. That he thinks he's Nandor, but he really has no idea what he is. But unfortunately, this never got revealed because the werewolf game went too far. You know, it's all fun and games, as they say, until someone gets their head torn off. And that's what fucking happened. The werewolf game escalated, and Anna decided she'd had enough of werewolf game, and she climbed up onto one of Dracula's wives and tore her fucking head off and killed her. And that put a bit of a kibosh on the festivities for the remainder of the night. So Dracula flew into a fucking rage when this happened. Almost was gonna kill him right there. But then I was like, okay. So I had sent Nandor with them for 3 reasons. Number 1, so that they would have someone to help them fight in the final battle, because I knew the final battle was going to be dangerous, and I wanted to send some powerful hitters with them. That's why Jack is there. That's why Nick is there. That's why Nandor is there. So that there are not only to absorb hits, to like be a wall to protect the players so the players don't just get iced in the first round, but also so that they have some muscle there that they can use against some of these vampires they're going to run up against many of whom are stronger than the player characters are. The second reason is for this whole story I just told you, which I think was an interesting story. The whole tale of Nandor, the flesh demon, and how he got his groove back. I thought was a really interesting story that I was excited to tell. Never quite got to finish it off. But there was also a third reason, which is that I knew from previous experience that if you send the player characters into a situation and you say, don't fuck up or that NPC will kill you, they're probably going to fuck up. It's not because they want to, because they're idiots and they're going to. It's probably going to happen. So how do you stop the NPC from killing all of them? Well, you have an airbag, and that's Nandor. In the old school mentality of the old vampires, and especially the old Zemis, the elders are all important. The elders are responsible for everything. Nandor is the elder. So if anyone in his party fucks up, it's his fault. And that was sort of my get out of jail free card of like, well, if you guys go to Dracula's castle and I tell you do not fuck up under any circumstances and you still fuck up, there will be at least that where I have Nandor there to take the blow first. And then if you fuck up again, then it will be on your heads. Dracula flies into a rage, yells at them, and then he and his remaining 2 wives go back into the castle pissed off. Nandor is like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? And the players decide, let's tell him it was Deacon's fault. The players just really, really don't like Deacon. And they've been trying to get rid of him pretty much from the beginning of the game. And they see this as the perfect opportunity to do so. Just fuck that guy. So they convince Nandor this is a good idea. They take him in there, they stake Deacon, they're like, hey, Deacon, bam! They drag him in there and they tell Dracula, like, we're super sorry. They have Nandor tell him, it's like, okay, this is what you tell Dracula. This will work. And so Nandor goes up there and he's like, oh, this guy Deacon, he's like my son and I love him so much. You know, but I'm willing to sacrifice him to you to make it better what's happened here, this terrible mistake because of the werewolf game. And Dracula's like, okay, all right. So at least you accept responsibility for what's happened here. And he's just like, no, sword of Dracula. And he does the like, we have to wait for it. It has to come from all the way across the castle. And then the sword like flies through the room and Dracula sword. And he just like, wha-chung! And he takes off Nandor's head. And just immediately absorbs all of his blood and soul into himself. And that's how Nandor got his groove back.